Hello and welcome. Tonight we embark on an epic journey through 1400 years of history to tell the entire story of Islam. We will travel from its origins in the quiet of a desert cave to the forging of a global empire under the first caliphs. From the glittering heights of its golden age, through the devastating storms of the Crusades and Mongol invasions, we will witness its rebirth in the age of gunpowder and trace its complex path into our modern world. Our story begins not with a king or an empire, but with a single man seeking silence. In the vast sun-scorched deserts of 7th century Arabia, a merchant known for his honesty would often retreat to a mountain cave, troubled by the world he saw around him. He wasn't searching for power or wealth, he was searching for answers. And one fateful night, in the deep quiet of the cave, a voice shattered the silence, delivering a message that would echo across continents and centuries. They returned the following year with more people, and in the quiet of the night, they made a pledge of allegiance to Muhammad, promising to protect him as they would their own kin. The path was now clear. Muhammad instructed his followers to begin migrating in secret, in small groups, to Yathrib. This was the Hijrah, the migration, a pivotal moment in the story of Islam. The Quraysh, realizing their enemy was slipping through their fingers, plotted to assassinate Muhammad once and for all. They planned for a group of men, one from each clan, to strike him simultaneously, so the guilt would be shared, and his clan could not seek. Our story begins in a place that seemed, to the great empires of the time, like a forgotten corner of the world. This was 7th century Arabia, a vast and formidable landscape of shimmering sands and jagged mountains, a place of fierce clan loyalties, ancient traditions, and a pantheon of gods for every occasion. At the heart of this world was the city of Mecca, a bustling, noisy hub of commerce and faith. It was a city built around a simple cube-shaped building known as the Kaaba. For generations, tribes from all across the Arabian Peninsula had made pilgrimages to this sacred house, filling it with idols representing hundreds of different deities. The pilgrimage was the lifeblood of Mecca, bringing wealth and prestige to the powerful tribe that controlled it, the Quraysh. Among the Quraysh was a man who walked a different path. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Orphaned at a young age and raised by his uncle, he had grown into a man known throughout Mecca for his character. They called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy one, and As-Sadiq, the truthful one. He was a respected merchant, a thoughtful husband to his beloved wife, the successful businesswoman Khadija, and a loving father. But beneath his calm exterior, Muhammad was a man deeply troubled by the world he saw. He saw a society rife with injustice. The powerful exploited the weak, tribal warfare was constant, and the poor were forgotten. He saw the empty ritual of idol worship and felt a profound spiritual hunger, a yearning for something deeper, something true. This spiritual restlessness would often lead him away from the clamor of the city. He would seek solitude in the rocky hills surrounding Mecca, finding refuge in a small quiet cavern known as the Cave of Hira. There, for days at a time, he would meditate, pray, and ponder the great questions of existence. It was his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world faded, and he could listen to the silence of the desert. It was during one of these retreats, in the year 610, on a night that Muslims would come to call the Night of Power, that the silence was broken forever. As Muhammad sat in the darkness of the cave, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a terrifying and majestic presence. The traditions say it was the Archangel Gabriel, who seized him and commanded him with a voice that seemed to shake the very mountain. "Read," the angel commanded. "I cannot read," Muhammad replied, for he was a man who had never been taught to read or write. The angel squeezed him so tightly he could barely breathe and commanded again, "Read." Again Muhammad answered, "I cannot read." The angel squeezed him a third and final time, then released him and delivered the first divine words that would become the foundation of a new faith. Read, in the name of your Lord who created, man from a clinging substance, read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen taught man that which he knew not. Muhammad stumbled out of the cave, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and terror. Was he going mad? Was he possessed? He fled down the mountainside, shaking, and rushed home to Khadijah, crying out, "Cover me, cover me!" She wrapped him in a cloak, holding him until his trembling subsided. He recounted the terrifying vision, and it was Khadijah, his rock and his confidant, who became the first to believe. "Never," she said. "By God, God will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your family. You help the poor, you serve your guests generously, and you bear the afflictions of the people." She saw not madness, but a divine calling. In her unwavering faith, the first spark of Islam was lit. For the next 3 years, the message was shared in secret. This was not a public revolution. It was a quiet, intimate whisper that spread through the bonds of family and friendship. After Khadijah came Muhammad's young cousin, Ali ibn Abi Talib, a boy who grew up in their household and pledged his loyalty without hesitation. Then came his closest friend, the gentle and respected merchant Abu Bakr, a man whose immediate acceptance of the message would prove crucial. And there was Zayd, a former slave whom Muhammad had freed and adopted as a son. One by one, a small devoted circle of followers began to form around him. They were the first Muslims, the first to submit to the radical idea that was at the core of the revelation, that there was only one God, Allah, the creator of all things, and that Muhammad was his final messenger. The message they heard was revolutionary. It spoke of a God who was merciful and just. It called for an end to the worship of idols and the arrogance of the powerful. It demanded compassion for the poor, the orphan, and the widow. It spoke of a final day of judgment, when every soul would be held accountable for its deeds. In a society built on tribal pride and inherited status, this was a message of radical equality. In the eyes of God, the message declared, the only thing that distinguished one person from another was piety and good deeds. Around the year 613, the divine command came for Muhammad to take his message public. He stood on the hill of Safa, overlooking the Kaaba, and called out to the clans of the Quraysh. When they had assembled, he asked them, "If I were to tell you that an army was behind this hill, about to attack you, would you believe me?" They all replied, "Yes, for we have never known you to tell a lie." Then he declared, "I am a warner to you of a terrible punishment." He proclaimed the oneness of God and warned them to abandon their idols. The reaction was immediate and hostile. His own uncle Abu Lahab cursed him, and the crowd dispersed in anger and mockery. The secret was out, and the struggle had begun. The powerful leaders of the Quraysh saw this new movement not as a spiritual awakening, but as a direct assault on their entire way of life. Muhammad's message threatened their ancestral traditions, their social hierarchy, and most importantly, their economic prosperity. If the idols in the Kaaba were declared worthless, the pilgrimage that made Mecca rich would end. And so, they unleashed a campaign of persecution against the new believers. At first it was ridicule and harassment, but as the number of Muslims grew, so did the brutality. The most vulnerable followers, the slaves and the poor who had no clan to protect them, suffered the most. A slave named Bilal, who would later become the first muezzin of Islam, was dragged out into the midday sun by his master, a massive boulder placed on his chest, and ordered to renounce his faith. Lying there, crushed and dehydrated, he could only repeat one word, Ahad, Ahad, one. He was eventually rescued when Abu Bakr purchased his freedom. Others were not so fortunate. A family, Yasir, his wife Sumaya, and their son Ammar were tortured publicly. Sumaya, refusing to recant, was speared to death by a Meccan leader, becoming the first martyr in Islam. Despite the persecution, the community held firm. The beauty and power of the Quranic revelations, which continued to be revealed to Muhammad, captivated hearts and minds. Even some of the most powerful men of Mecca were swayed. The conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man known for his fiery temper and his fierce opposition to the Muslims, sent shockwaves through the city. He had set out one day with his sword, intending to kill Muhammad, but was intercepted and told to first deal with his own sister, who had secretly converted. He stormed into her house and struck her, but when he saw her bleeding, he was overcome with remorse. He asked to see the scripture she was reading, and as he read the verses of the Quran, his heart was transformed. He went straight to Muhammad, not to kill him, but to declare his faith. The Quraysh, seeing that violence was not stamping out the movement, escalated their tactics. They imposed a complete social and economic boycott on Muhammad's clan, the Banu Hashim. For 3 years, the Muslims and their protectors were isolated in a narrow valley, forbidden from trading or marrying with the rest of the Meccans. They endured starvation and immense hardship, their suffering echoing through the valley at night. Just as the boycott finally ended, Muhammad faced his greatest personal trial. In a single year, which would become known as the Year of Sorrow, he lost the 2 people who had been his greatest protectors. His beloved wife Khadija, his first believer and constant source of strength, passed away, and just weeks later, his uncle Abu Talib, who had raised him and despite never converting, had used his status as clan chief to shield him from the worst of the persecution, also died. With Abu Talib gone, Muhammad was left exposed and vulnerable. The harassment intensified, and it became clear that Mecca was no longer safe. Muhammad began to look for a new home for his fledgling community. He traveled to the nearby city of Taif, but was rejected and stoned by its people. Dejected and wounded, he returned to Mecca, his future uncertain. But then, a glimmer of hope appeared from an unexpected direction. During the annual pilgrimage, Muhammad met a small group of men from a city to the north, a city called Yathrib. Yathrib was a city of farmers and rival tribes, plagued by endless internal conflict. These men were drawn to Muhammad's message of unity and justice, and they saw in him a leader who could finally bring peace to their city, revenge. But the plot was revealed to Muhammad. On the appointed night, as the assassins surrounded his house, he slipped out into the darkness with his trusted friend, Abu Bakr. To deceive the plotters, his cousin Ali lay in his bed, wrapped in his cloak. Muhammad and Abu Bakr traveled not north towards Yathrib, but south, hiding for 3 days in a cave as the Quraysh search parties scoured the mountains for them. The traditions tell a story of a spider weaving a web across the cave's entrance and a dove laying its eggs, convincing the trackers that no one could possibly be inside. After the search died down, they continued their journey, and after several arduous days, they arrived at the outskirts of Yathrib in the year 622. The city was buzzing with anticipation. Men, women, and children lined the streets, chanting and singing, overjoyed at the arrival of the Prophet. This was more than just a migration. It was the birth of a new society. The city of Yathrib was renamed Madinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. Here in Medina, the first Muslim community, the Ummah, was truly forged. This was a community bound not by the old ties of blood and tribe, but by a shared faith. Muhammad immediately set about building the foundations of this new society. He established the first mosque, a simple structure that served as a center for prayer, governance, and community life. He created a system of brotherhood, pairing the Meccan migrants with the residents of Medina, who shared their homes and livelihoods. Most remarkably, he drafted a document known as the Constitution of Medina. This was a formal agreement that established a framework for peace and cooperation between all the inhabitants of the city, the Muslim migrants, the native Medinan Muslims, and the city's significant Jewish tribes. It declared them all to be one community, guaranteeing religious freedom and mutual protection. It was a revolutionary blueprint for a pluralistic society, a testament to the vision of the man who had started his journey seeking silence in a cave. The spark that had been lit in the darkness of Hira had now found a home, and from this small city-state in the Arabian desert, its light was about to spread to the world. The year is 632. In the city of Medina, the Prophet Muhammad, the man who had united the warring tribes of Arabia under the banner of a single faith, is gone. His death left a profound void, a silence that fell over the bustling city he had built. The community, the Ummah, was overcome with grief, but it also faced an immediate and terrifying crisis. Who would lead them now? The revelations had ceased. The voice that had guided them was silent. For a moment it seemed as if the entire fragile enterprise could shatter and dissolve back into the tribal chaos from which it had emerged. It was in this moment of uncertainty that our second chapter begins. The story of the Rashidun, or the rightly guided caliphs. This is the tale of 4 men, 4 of the Prophet's closest companions who would take up his mantle and, in a breathtakingly short span of time, transform a small community in the Arabian desert into a world-spanning empire. But it is also a story of human struggle, of political ambition, and of a tragic fracture that would echo through the centuries. As the community grappled with its loss, the leaders gathered. A dispute arose. Should the leader be from the Prophet's family, or should he be chosen by consensus? In a tense meeting, it was Abu Bakr, Muhammad's oldest friend and father-in-law, who rose to the occasion. He reminded the gathered men of their unity and faith, and with his calm wisdom and unimpeachable reputation, he was chosen as the first caliph, the successor to the messenger of God. His first act was to address the grieving people with words that would define the nature of his leadership. O people, I have been appointed over you, though I am not the best among you. If I do well, help me, and if I do wrong, set me right. Obey me as long as I obey God and his messenger. But if I disobey God and his messenger, you owe me no obedience. Abu Bakr's task was immense. News of the Prophet's death had caused many of the newly converted Arabian tribes to rebel, believing their allegiance was to Muhammad the man, not to the state of Medina. They refused to pay the zakat, the charitable tax that was a pillar of the new faith. To many, it seemed the union of Arabia was already crumbling, but Abu Bakr, the gentle merchant, revealed an iron will. He declared that there could be no distinction between prayer and charity, that the faith was a complete whole. He launched a series of decisive military campaigns, known as the Ridda Wars, or the Wars of Apostasy. Within a year, his brilliant general Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as the Sword of God, had crushed the rebellions and reunified the entire Arabian Peninsula, proving that the state Muhammad had built would not die with him. With Arabia united and secure, Abu Bakr turned his gaze outward, to the 2 colossal empires that had dominated the world for centuries, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Romans to the west, and the Sasanian Persian Empire to the east. These were ancient, wealthy, and powerful civilizations, locked in a centuries-long struggle that had left both exhausted. To them, the Arabs were little more than desert nomads, a nuisance at best. They could never have imagined what was about to happen. Abu Bakr launched a daring 2-front war, sending his armies into Byzantine Syria and Sasanian Iraq. The Arab fighters, fueled by a fervent belief that they were carrying God's message to the world, were unlike any army these empires had ever faced. They were fast, resilient, and utterly fearless. They fought not for gold or glory, but for a cause they believed was greater than life itself. After just 2 years as Caliph, Abu Bakr fell ill. On his deathbed, he nominated his successor, ensuring a smooth transition of power. He chose the one man whose strength and vision he knew could guide the community through the monumental task ahead, Umar ibn al-Khattab. If Abu Bakr was the gentle, unifier, Umar was the fiery architect. A towering figure of immense energy and strict justice, Umar took the title Amir al-Mu'minin, the commander of the faithful. It was under his 10-year rule that the story of Islam exploded onto the world stage. Umar unleashed the full force of the Arab armies. In the year 636, at the Battle of Yarmouk in Syria, Khalid ibn al-Walid led a vastly outnumbered Muslim army against a massive Byzantine force. Using a brilliant strategy in the midst of a blinding sandstorm, they achieved a stunning, seemingly impossible victory that shattered Byzantine control over the region. The great cities of Damascus, and eventually Jerusalem, opened their gates to the Muslim armies. When Umar himself traveled to accept the surrender of Jerusalem, the story goes that he entered the holy city not as a conquering tyrant, but as a humble pilgrim, walking in a simple patched robe, ensuring the Christian inhabitants that their churches and holy sites would be protected. Simultaneously, in the east, the Persian Empire was crumbling. At the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, another outnumbered Muslim army faced the might of the Persian war machine, complete with its fearsome elephants. After days of brutal fighting, the Arabs were victorious, a victory that broke the back of the Sasanian dynasty. The Persian capital, Ctesiphon, with its legendary treasures, fell soon after. In less than a decade, Umar had overseen the conquest of Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the entire Persian Empire. It was an expansion of unprecedented speed and scale. But Umar was more than a conqueror. He was a nation builder. He established the institutions of a true empire. He created a new calendar, starting from the year of the Hijra. He established a treasury, organized a system of salaries for soldiers, and founded new garrison cities like Basra and Kufa to administer the vast new territories. He was known for his personal piety and his concern for the poor, famously roaming the streets of Medina at night to check on the welfare of his people. Umar's powerful reign was cut short by an assassin's blade in 644, when a disgruntled Persian slave stabbed him in the mosque. On his deathbed, he appointed a council of 6 to choose the next caliph. Their choice fell upon Uthman ibn Affan, another of the Prophet's earliest companions and a wealthy, pious, and gentle man. Uthman's rule continued the expansion, with Muslim armies pushing further into North Africa and Central Asia. But his greatest legacy was a project of immense importance. As the empire grew, slight variations in the recitation of the Quran began to appear in different regions. Fearing that the divine message could become corrupted, Uthman commissioned a group of the Prophet's original scribes to compile a single, definitive, standardized text of the Quran. Copies of this official version were sent to all corners of the empire, and all other versions were ordered to be destroyed. This act ensured that the Quran would remain a single unified text for all Muslims, for all time. Yet Uthman's caliphate was also when the seeds of internal conflict began to sprout. He was accused of nepotism, appointing too many of his relatives from the Umayyad clan to positions of power. Discontent grew in the new garrison cities, fueled by political grievances and economic anxieties. This discontent festered and grew into open rebellion. In 656, a group of rebels from Egypt marched on Medina, surrounded Uthman's house, and, in a shocking act that would forever stain the conscience of the Ummah, they broke in and murdered the elderly caliph as he was reading the Quran. The murder of Uthman plunged the community into its first great crisis, the first fitna or civil war. The man chosen to succeed him was Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, a man revered for his bravery and wisdom. But Ali inherited a community on the brink of collapse. He immediately faced a challenge to his authority from two sides. One was led by the Prophet's widow, Aisha, who demanded justice for Uthman's murder. This led to the tragic Battle of the Camel, where two Muslim armies, both led by companions of the Prophet, fought each other near Basra. A greater challenge came from Muawiyah, the powerful governor of Syria, and a relative of the slain Uthman. Muawiyah refused to pledge allegiance to Ali until Uthman's assassins were brought to justice. This standoff culminated in the bloody Battle of Siffin. Just as Ali's forces seemed close to victory, Muawiyah's troops raised pages of the Quran on their spears, a call for arbitration. Ali, reluctant to cause more bloodshed, agreed to negotiate. This decision, however, caused a faction of his own followers, the Kharijites, or seceders, to abandon him, declaring that only God could judge. The arbitration failed, the war remained unresolved, and the Ummah was fractured. In 661, Ali was struck down by a Kharijite assassin while praying in the mosque of Kufa. His death marked the end of an era. The age of the rightly guided caliphs was over. This first generation of leaders had overseen a miracle, forging a global empire from nothing. But their story is also a profound human tragedy. The very same generation that had prayed together behind the Prophet found themselves drawing swords against one another. The disagreements over leadership that had simmered since the Prophet's death had finally erupted into open conflict, creating a deep and painful wound in the body of the Ummah. From this wound, two great branches of Islam would grow. The majority, who would come to be known as Sunnis, would accept the legitimacy of the first three caliphs and the political reality that followed. A minority, the Shi'at Ali, or the partisans of Ali, who would become the Shia, would hold that leadership rightfully belonged to Ali and his descendants alone. The Golden Age of unity was over, and a new, more complex chapter was about to begin. The age of the rightly guided caliphs had ended in blood and division, leaving the Muslim world fractured. But from the chaos of that first civil war, a new power rose, one that would trade the humble piety of Medina for the glittering pomp of empire. With the death of Ali, his old rival Muawiyah, the shrewd governor of Syria, became the undisputed leader of the Muslim world. He established the Umayyad Caliphate, the first great Islamic dynasty. The capital moved from the dusty plains of Arabia to the ancient cosmopolitan city of Damascus. The leadership of the Ummah was no longer chosen by consensus. It was now a hereditary monarchy, passed down from father to son. For nearly a century, the Umayyads ruled. They were master administrators and empire builders. Under them, the Islamic Empire reached its greatest extent, stretching from the borders of modern-day Spain and France in the west to the Indus River Valley in the east. They established a common currency, made Arabic the official language of government, and sponsored the creation of some of Islam's first great architectural wonders, like the magnificent Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, a shimmering golden testament to the permanence of the new faith. Yet for all their worldly success, many felt the Umayyads had strayed. They were seen as worldly kings, not pious leaders, and discontent simmered, especially among those who felt the non-Arab converts were treated as second-class citizens. This discontent eventually erupted into a full-blown revolution, led by a faction that claimed a closer lineage to the Prophet, the Abbasids. In the year 750, in a series of bloody battles, the black banners of the Abbasids swept across the empire, toppling the Umayyad dynasty. They promised a return to the spiritual roots of Islam, a government that would be more just, more pious, and more inclusive. To mark this new beginning, they decided to build a new capital, a city that would be the heart of their new world order. And so, our story moves to the banks of the Tigris River, to a place where the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur founded a city destined for legend, Baghdad. This was no ordinary city. It was a marvel of planning, built as a perfect circle, with the caliph's grand palace and the main mosque at its absolute center, symbolizing that God and his representative were at the heart of the community. They called it Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace, but it would become known as the center of the world. Its libraries, hospitals, and observatories would become the envy of all civilizations. For the next 500 years, Baghdad was the undisputed global capital of science, medicine, philosophy, and art. This was the dawn of the Islamic Golden Age. At the heart of this intellectual explosion was an institution that has captured the imagination of history, the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Begun under the legendary Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the caliph from the tales of 1001 Nights, and expanded by his son al-Ma'mun, the House of Wisdom was more than just a library. It was a translation center, a university, and a research institute all in one. The Abbasid caliphs, driven by a deep belief that knowledge was a universal treasure, sent emissaries to the corners of the known world, to Byzantium, to India, to Persia, to collect every book they could find. They brought back the great works of the Greeks, the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, the geometry of Euclid, the medicine of Galen. They gathered the astronomical tables of the Persians and the mathematical innovations of the Hindus. In the halls of the House of Wisdom, an army of scholars, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian alike, worked side by side, translating these priceless texts into Arabic. This wasn't just an act of preservation. It was an act of absorption and synthesis. They weren't just copying the past. They were building upon it. From this incredible concentration of knowledge, a wave of discovery washed over the world. A Persian scholar in the House of Wisdom, named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, took the Indian system of numerals, including the revolutionary concept of zero, and combined it with Greek geometry. In doing so, he created a new branch of mathematics he called al-Jabr, which we know today as algebra. His work would fundamentally change the course of science. In the field of medicine, this era saw the creation of the first true public hospitals, with separate wards for different illnesses, medical schools, and pharmacies. A physician in Baghdad, named Al-Razi, wrote a vast encyclopedia of medicine so comprehensive it would be used as a standard medical textbook in Europe for 500 years. Later, the brilliant Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine, a monumental work that codified all existing medical knowledge and remained an essential part of medical education for centuries. The scientists of the Golden Age were driven by a relentless curiosity. In Cairo, Ibn al-Haytham conducted revolutionary experiments on light, proving that we see because light enters our eyes, not because our eyes emit rays. He invented the camera obscura and established the scientific method of hypothesis and experimentation centuries before the European Renaissance. Astronomers in Baghdad and Samarkand built massive observatories, mapping the stars with incredible precision, correcting the calculations of the ancient Greeks, and giving us the names of stars we still use today, like Aldebaran and Betelgeuse. This was a civilization drunk on knowledge, confident in the power of the human mind to understand the universe God had created. It was a time of breathtaking art, where a prohibition on depicting the human form led to the development of stunningly complex geometric patterns and calligraphy. It was a time of enchanting stories, where the tales of Sinbad, Aladdin, and Ali Baba were woven together into the rich tapestry of the 1001 Nights. For centuries, the light of Baghdad shone brightly, illuminating a world that in many other places had fallen into a dark age. It was a beacon of learning, tolerance, and discovery. But no golden age lasts forever. While the scholars of Baghdad looked to the stars, new threats were gathering on the horizon, forces that would eventually bring this incredible era of peace and wisdom to a violent and tragic end. The golden light of Baghdad, for all its brilliance, could not last forever. While the scholars of the House of Wisdom mapped the heavens, the foundations of their world were slowly cracking. The vast Abbasid Empire, once a unified powerhouse, had begun to fray at the edges. Ambitious governors in distant provinces like Spain, Egypt, and Persia broke away, founding their own dynasties and paying only lip service to the Caliph in Baghdad. The Caliph himself had become a figurehead, a spiritual symbol with little real power, often a prisoner in his own palace, controlled by his Turkish slave soldiers. The unity that had fueled the Golden Age was fading, replaced by internal rivalries and political decay. The Islamic world, once a mighty fortress, was becoming a house divided, and it was into this fractured world that two of the most terrifying storms in history were about to break. The first storm came from the west. In the year 1095, in a field in France, Pope Urban II delivered a fiery sermon calling on the knights and nobles of Christendom to march east to reclaim the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim rule. To the Islamic world, which was largely unaware of the political and religious fervor brewing in Europe, this call to arms came as a complete shock. They were about to meet a new kind of enemy, one driven by a piety as fierce as their own. They called themselves pilgrims. The Muslims would come to know them as the Crusaders. The First Crusade was not a single disciplined army, but a chaotic, zealous wave that crashed upon the shores of the Holy Land. The local Muslim rulers, consumed by their own petty squabbles, failed to unite against this common threat. They watched disbelieving as the Crusaders captured city after city. In 1099, the unthinkable happened. The Crusaders breached the walls of Jerusalem. What followed was a brutal massacre that would leave a deep scar on the memory of the Muslim world. For days, the streets of the holy city ran with blood as the conquerors slaughtered thousands of its inhabitants, Muslims and Jews, men, women, and children. The Dome of the Rock was stripped of its treasures, and a cross was placed atop it. For decades, the Crusader kingdoms clung to their coastal territories, a thorn in the side of a divided Islamic world. It seemed no leader could rise to challenge them until a man of Kurdish origin, a brilliant and chivalrous warrior named Salah al-Din, known to the West as Saladin, appeared on the scene. Saladin was a man of deep faith and strategic genius. He understood that the Crusaders could only be defeated if the Muslims were united. Patiently, he consolidated his power, first becoming the master of Egypt, then Syria, forging a powerful state that finally encircled the Crusader kingdoms. The final confrontation came in the summer of 1187 at a place called the Horns of Hattin. Saladin lured the main Crusader army, including the king of Jerusalem, into a dry, waterless plain. He then set fire to the dry grass, surrounding them with smoke and flames. Trapped, dehydrated, and demoralized, the Crusader army was annihilated in a single decisive battle. The path to Jerusalem was now open. Just a few months later, Saladin stood before the gates of the city that had been lost for 88 years. The Christians inside feared a repeat of the massacre of 1099, but Saladin was not a man driven by vengeance. He entered Jerusalem as a liberator, not a butcher. He forbade any killing or looting. He allowed the Christian inhabitants to ransom themselves for a small fee, and those who could not pay were allowed to leave freely. The cross was removed from the Dome of the Rock, and the city was restored to Muslim rule, its Christian holy sites respected and protected. Saladin's mercy and chivalry became a legend, even among his European enemies. The Crusades would continue for another century, but they would never again pose the same existential threat. A fragile balance had been restored, but as the Islamic world recovered from the storm from the west, a far greater, far more terrible storm was gathering in the east. This was not an army of knights fighting for a holy city. This was a force of nature, a human hurricane that would sweep across the world, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. This was the Mongol storm. It began on the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, where a charismatic leader named Genghis Khan had united the nomadic Mongol tribes into the most terrifying military machine the world had ever seen. The Mongols were masters of speed, discipline, and psychological warfare. They would descend upon a city, demand its surrender, and if it refused, they would slaughter its entire population, leaving pyramids of skulls as a warning to the next city in their path. In the early 1200s, this storm broke upon the eastern edges of the Islamic world. The great prosperous cities of the Khwarezmian Empire, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, centers of art and learning, were wiped from the face of the earth. Millions were killed, but this was only the beginning. In the 1250s, Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, turned his gaze towards the heart of Islam itself, Baghdad. Even in its decline, Baghdad was still the jewel of the world, the symbolic capital of a civilization. It was the city of the Caliph, the home of the House of Wisdom. When Hulagu's massive army appeared before its walls in 1258, the Caliph, arrogant and isolated, made a fatal miscalculation. He refused to surrender, believing the city's walls were impregnable and that the Muslim world would rush to his aid. No one came. For 2 weeks, the Mongols bombarded the city with their siege engines. When the walls were finally breached, the horde poured in. The destruction that followed is almost impossible to comprehend. For an entire week, the city was given over to slaughter and pillage. Palaces, mosques, hospitals, and homes were burned to the ground. The population, estimated to be close to 1 million people, was massacred. The last Abbasid caliph was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, so that royal blood would not be spilled on the earth. The greatest tragedy of all was the destruction of the House of Wisdom. The Mongols, who had no use for books, threw the library's entire collection, hundreds of thousands of priceless hand-copied manuscripts on medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and poetry, into the Tigris River. The survivors said the river ran black with the ink of the books for days and red with the blood of the scholars. With that single act of destruction, 500 years of accumulated knowledge, the heart of the Golden Age was lost forever. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 was more than just a military defeat. It was a psychological cataclysm. The light of the Islamic world had been extinguished. Its greatest city was a smoldering ruin. Its caliph was dead. It felt like the end of the world, the final, brutal chapter in the story of a civilization. It seemed impossible that anything could ever rise from such complete and utter devastation. The world of Islam lay in ruins. Baghdad, the city of peace, was a ghost town of rubble and bitter memories. The Tigris River had run black with the ink of a lost golden age. The Caliphate, the single thread that had connected the Muslim world for 5 centuries, was severed. It was an age of darkness, an age of despair. It seemed as if the story of Islamic civilization had reached its final, tragic end. But history is rarely so simple. An ending is often just a new beginning in disguise. From the ashes of the Mongol apocalypse, the Islamic world would not just recover. It would be reborn, rising like a phoenix into a new and brilliant era of power and splendor. This new age would not be defined by a single unified empire, but by three mighty, distinct, and often rival civilizations, each a titan in its own right. They were the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, and their story was built on a revolutionary new technology that would change the face of warfare forever: gunpowder. Our story begins first in the west, in Anatolia, the rugged peninsula that is modern-day Turkey. Here, among the chaos left by the Mongols, a small Turkish tribe led by a warrior named Osman began to grow. They were Ghazis, warriors for the faith, driven by a powerful code of honor and a dream of expanding the borders of Islam. For over a century they grew, absorbing smaller states, their power swelling with each victory. They were the Ottomans, and they had their eyes on the greatest prize of all, the legendary 1,000-year-old Christian city of Constantinople. For centuries, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, had been the ultimate dream of Muslim conquerors. It was a city protected by God and by the most formidable walls ever built. Army after army had tried and failed to take it. But in 1453, a new sultan, a brilliant and ambitious 21-year-old named Mehmed II, stood before its walls. He was a man of iron will and boundless imagination. He brought with him a new and terrifying weapon, massive cannons, forged by a Hungarian engineer that could hurl enormous stone balls capable of shattering the ancient walls. The siege was an epic of human ingenuity and determination. When the city's defenders blocked the harbor with a giant chain, Mehmed ordered his men to do the impossible. They greased massive logs and dragged 70 of their ships overland, up and down a hill and into the harbor, bypassing the chain completely. The defenders awoke one morning to find the Ottoman fleet floating behind their lines. The city was doomed. On May 29, 1453, the Ottoman soldiers poured through the shattered walls. Mehmed the Conqueror rode into the city, not as a destroyer, but as a new master. He went to the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, and as a symbol of his victory, it was converted into a mosque. Constantinople was reborn as Istanbul, the new capital of a new global superpower. The Ottoman Empire became the undisputed leader of the Sunni Muslim world. Under sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent, its power was absolute. Its elite Janissary soldiers were the most feared infantry in the world. Its fleets controlled the Mediterranean. Its borders stretched from Hungary in the north to the deserts of Arabia in the south. Istanbul became a vibrant, multicultural capital, a center of art, architecture, and learning that rivaled the old Baghdad. The Ottomans were the new caliphs, the new protectors of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and for the next 400 years, their story would be the story of Islam's dominant power. But as the Ottomans built their Sunni empire in the west, a new and different power was stirring in the east, in the ancient lands of Persia. Here a charismatic and mystical young leader named Shah Ismail emerged. He was a poet, a warrior, and a man who believed he was divinely inspired. He united the disparate tribes of Persia, not just with the sword, but with a powerful new idea. He declared that the official religion of his new empire would be Twelver Shia Islam. This was a momentous decision. For centuries, Shia Muslims had been a minority, often persecuted. Now for the first time they had a mighty empire to champion their cause. This act gave Persia a unique identity, setting it apart from its powerful Sunni Ottoman neighbor to the west and the Mughals to the east. It also set the stage for centuries of rivalry and conflict between the two great powers of Islam. This was the Safavid Empire. Under rulers like Shah Abbas the Great, it experienced its own golden age. He built a new capital at Isfahan, a city so beautiful that a Persian proverb declared, "Isfahan is half the world." Its grand squares, bustling bazaars, and magnificent mosques, covered in intricate blue tilework, were a testament to a new era of Persian cultural and artistic genius. The Safavids became masters of art, producing some of the most beautiful carpets, miniature paintings, and ceramics the world has ever seen. They created a vibrant, sophisticated culture that became the heartland of the Shia world. And finally, our story takes us further east to the vast and diverse subcontinent of India. Here, a new chapter was written by a man named Babur, a descendant of both the Mongol conqueror Genghis Khan and the fearsome warlord Timur. Babur was a man of destiny. After losing his ancestral kingdom in Central Asia, he turned his gaze south. With a small army and the power of gunpowder artillery, he swept into India, and at the Battle of Panipat in 1526, he crushed the armies of the Delhi Sultanate and laid the foundation for a new empire, the Mughal Empire. The Mughals would rule India for over 300 years, overseeing an era of incredible wealth, power, and cultural fusion. Under emperors like Akbar the Great, the empire reached its zenith. Akbar was a visionary ruler, a Muslim emperor ruling over a vast Hindu majority. He practiced a remarkable policy of religious tolerance, abolishing the tax on non-Muslims, inviting scholars from different faiths to his court for debates, and even attempting to create a new syncretic religion that blended the best of all faiths. The Mughals were perhaps the greatest builders in Islamic history. They left behind a legacy of architectural wonders that still take the breath away. The most famous of these is a monument to love itself, the Taj Mahal. Built by the Emperor Shah Jahan as a tomb for his beloved wife, this perfect white marble mausoleum is the jewel of Islamic art in India, a symbol of a unique civilization that blended Persian Islamic culture with the rich traditions of the subcontinent. The Mongol storm had shattered the old world, but it had not destroyed it. Islam had not ended. It had been transformed. The single central caliphate was gone, but in its place stood three mighty, magnificent gunpowder empires, each a world unto itself, each contributing a new and vibrant chapter to the ongoing story of Islam. For a time it seemed this new dawn of power and glory would last forever, but a new force was rising in the world, a power from the West that, in the centuries to come, would challenge and ultimately dismantle them all. For centuries, the three great gunpowder empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, had stood as titans, the centers of gravity for the Islamic world. Their courts were magnificent, their armies formidable, and their cultures vibrant. To the people living within them, it seemed this order was permanent, a divinely ordained reality. But while they looked inward, perfecting their art and consolidating their power, a profound and irreversible shift was happening in the West. Europe, once a fragmented and peripheral region, was being transformed by the fires of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and most crucially the Industrial Revolution. A new kind of power was being forged, a power based not just on soldiers and cannons, but on steam engines, factories, and financial systems. A new, confident, and insatiably ambitious Europe was looking out at the world, and the aging Islamic empires were directly in its sights. This final chapter of our story begins not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping decline. The Ottoman Empire, once the terror of Europe, was now derisively called the sick man of Europe, its vast territories slowly being chipped away. The Safavid dynasty in Persia collapsed from internal decay, and in India the Mughal Empire crumbled, its authority replaced by the ruthlessly efficient British East India Company. The old world was dying. The first great shockwave of the new era came in 1798, when a young French general named Napoleon Bonapart landed in Egypt. His invasion was a military spectacle, but its true impact was psychological. It wasn't just that a European army could so easily defeat the local forces. It was that they brought with them printing presses, scientists, and new ideas that seemed to belong to a different century. For the Muslim world, it was a brutal awakening. The balance of power had fundamentally and perhaps permanently shifted. What followed was the age of colonialism. Over the next century, nearly the entire Muslim world fell under direct or indirect European control. The French took North Africa. The British solidified their hold on India and Egypt. The Dutch controlled Indonesia. The Russians pushed south into Central Asia. For the first time in history, the heartlands of Islam were ruled by foreign, non-Muslim powers. This was more than a military and political defeat. It was a profound civilizational crisis. The old ways had failed. The question that now echoed from the cafes of Cairo to the mosques of Delhi was, what went wrong, and how do we fix it? The answers that emerged were complex, varied, and often in violent disagreement with one another. One group of thinkers, the modernist reformers, argued that the Islamic world had fallen behind because it had closed its mind. They believed that the spirit of the Golden Age, its curiosity, its embrace of reason and knowledge, had been lost. Figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani and Muhammad Abduh in Egypt argued that Islam was not the enemy of science and progress, it was its wellspring. They called for a reinterpretation of Islamic thought, for embracing modern education, technology, and political ideas like constitutionalism, believing these were the tools needed to rebuild their societies and resist the West on their own terms. Another group took the opposite view. These were the traditionalists and revivalists. They argued that the problem wasn't a lack of modernity, but a lack of true faith. They believed that the decline was a punishment from God for having strayed from the pure, unadulterated Islam of the Prophet and his companions. Movements like the Wahhabi revival in Arabia called for a purging of all later innovations and a strict return to the fundamentals of the faith. To them, the path to salvation lay not in imitating the West, but in rediscovering the strength of their own origins. And then there was a third, powerful new idea that began to take hold: nationalism. As the old faith-based identities of the Ottoman and Mughal empires weakened, new identities based on shared language, culture, and ethnicity began to rise. People started to see themselves not just as Muslims, but as Turks, as Arabs, as Persians. This idea would eventually redraw the map of the entire region. The final death blow to the old order came with the First World War. The Ottoman Empire, having sided with Germany, was defeated and dismantled. Its Arab territories were carved up by Britain and France, who drew straight lines on a map, creating the artificial borders of the modern Middle East with little regard for the people who lived there. In the Turkish heartland, a fiercely secular nationalist and army officer named Mustafa Kemal Atatürk rose from the ashes. He drove out the occupying forces, founded the modern Republic of Turkey, and, in a move that sent shockwaves across the entire Muslim world, he officially abolished the Caliphate in 1924. For the first time in 1,300 years, the Ummah had no caliph, no single symbolic leader. The last thread connecting the present to the age of the rightly guided was gone. The second half of the 20th century was an era of struggle and hope. One by one, the colonized nations fought for and won their independence. But freedom brought its own challenges. The new nation-states were often poor, unstable, and ruled by authoritarian leaders, propped up by either the United States or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. For many, the promises of both nationalism and socialism failed to deliver justice, dignity, or prosperity. This widespread disillusionment led to the resurgence of a powerful force, political Islam. Movements emerged arguing that the solution to their society's problems lay in returning Islam to the center of public life. This idea found its most dramatic expression in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, which overthrew a Western-backed Shah and established the world's first modern Islamic republic. This brings us to today, to the complex, vibrant, and often turbulent world of Islam in the 21st century. The story that began with a single man in a cave is now the story of nearly 2 billion people, a quarter of all humanity. The heartlands of Islam are no longer in the Middle East. The countries with the largest Muslim populations are in South and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. It is a faith of incredible diversity, practiced by people of every color, culture, and nationality, from the skyscrapers of Kuala Lumpur to the villages of Senegal, from the suburbs of Chicago to the mountains of Bosnia. The challenges of this modern maze are immense. The turmoil following the Arab Spring, the devastating rise of extremist groups who twist the faith to justify violence, and the ongoing struggle to reconcile timeless traditions with the pressures of a hyper-modern, globalized world. But if the long arc of this story has taught us anything, it is that Islam has always been a story of resilience, of adaptation, and of renewal. We began our journey in the quiet of a desert cave with a single whispered word: read. From that first revelation, we have followed a story that has spanned 14 centuries and crossed every continent. We have witnessed the birth of a community, the forging of a world-spanning empire, and the dazzling brilliance of a golden age that lit up the world. We have walked through the glittering courts of Damascus and the hallowed halls of Baghdad's House of Wisdom. We have stood with Saladin before the gates of Jerusalem and marveled at the architectural wonders of the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals. We have felt the earth shake under the hoofbeats of the Mongol horde and navigated the painful, complex encounter with the modern West. It has been a story of soaring triumphs and profound tragedies, of unshakable faith and very human failings. It has been a story of unity and division, of empires rising and falling, and of a civilization that has, time and again, found a way to be reborn from its own ashes. The story of Islam is not a relic of the past, confined to the pages of history, books. It is a living, breathing narrative, a story that continues to be written every single day in the lives, the hopes, the struggles, and the prayers of 2 billion people around the globe. The final chapter has not been written, because there is no final chapter. The journey that began in the heart of a prophet in the Arabian desert continues, its message still echoing, its story still unfolding in the heart of our shared human world.